You are listening to the Liminal Living Podcast, a resource of practices and perspectives for those in dark nights and deconstruction.
All right, when my son was 6 years old, he wanted goats so bad. So we spent weeks cleaning out our barn and building pens inside of it. And then we showed him all the work that was done. And he came up to us and whispered, and now we can get goats. So we found a local farmer and she sold us 2 baby goats just ready to leave their mama. And she delivered them the day before his birthday party. And then we hid them in the barn and brought them food and water and checked on them all through the night. And then on the day of his party, we put collars around them and leash on them, and we brought them in the house for like a big unveiling of the party in the midst of it. And he just loved them instantly and ever since, and we've had them 10 years, and this is as close to shepherding as I'm ever gonna get. So when we talk about Jesus being a shepherd, we need to have a basic understanding of how that works, and it's rather different. Today we're in John chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. Jesus refers to himself as a shepherd and a gate and sheep and folds and all this stuff that's going on, right? Now a shepherd would often be hired by families of an entire town to care for the town's sheep. And during the day, he would lead them to food and water and protect them from predators and all that kind of stuff. And then at night, he would lead them into a sheepfold, which was a rock wall that was a circular shape. It's a rock wall, circular in shape, and it had one door. Boom, there it is. There's a door right there. And that was the gate. You can only come in and out there. So you can see why a common understanding of this text is that Jesus is a shepherd calling to the people of the world to become Christians and get into the fold of church fellowship, where inside the fold you are under the care of Christ and everything is safe. But did you notice something? Jesus isn't leading them into a fold, but out of one. Okay? It says this specifically, the one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper, we don't know who that is yet, opens the gate for him and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out of the fold. Okay, so my question is, if the fold is not some safe little Christian haven, but something else that we need to be led out of, what is it? That was my question. What is it? If this story was Jesus walking around the earth calling out for people to come follow him and get into my fold, then the folks listening would have figured that out. But it says in verse 6 that they didn't understand what the heck he was saying. Now, the Orthodox Church believed that this fold, this whole passage refers to death. Well, that's crazy, right? The main point of the Gospel of John, all 7 signs point to this moment where Jesus says he's going to defeat death, the ultimate enemy of God's good creation. So what about all those who died before Christ defeated death? That's the question, right? Orthodox Christians believe this passage is Jesus entering death on Good Friday and leading the captives out in some great exodus back into God's presence. Now, later in the passage, in one that we didn't read today, Jesus refers to himself as the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep. Because Christ lives perfectly and dies willingly in surrender to God. And the gatekeeper, death, must let him in because he did this. And Christ can then lead those out of death and into safety. And you and I are called to live in the same self-sacrificial manner that Christ did, in faith that if we live surrendered, it brings about life. Howard Thurman says this: surrender is the key to freedom. It is the ultimate act of faith. And we don't have to fear surrender or loss or sacrifice or humility or gentleness. These aren't weaknesses. Christ did these things perfectly and defeated death with them, proving that love is the most powerful force in the universe. So if you want to see your world changed, if you want to see healing and reconciliation and peace and well-being and human flourishing, you don't have to try to gather power and greatness to yourself and then wield it upon the world. And you don't have to put your trust in anyone who promises greatness in the same manner. Because how you get something determines who you are when you have it. You don't have to sell your soul to gain the world. You don't have to trade love for power. All that is needed is faithfulness to this way of Christ. Okay, humans have this flawed tendency to place their faith in someone who will wield power on their behalf against their perceived enemy. Now, the problem with this is that we've been trying this for thousands of years. I think the first recorded war was around 4000 BC, and we have not fixed the world with it yet. So, this passage talks about a thief that comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Who is the thief, is my question. Well, the thief is not Satan come to deceive you away from the faith through sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Now, the thief is actually anyone that promises blessing by another way than Christ's way. Now, that can be a religious leader asking for your money so they can buy a new private jet. That can be a political figure promising to annihilate the other side if you give them your vote. That can be a boss promising you a raise if you cheat that client a little bit that benefits your company. That could be a fundamentalist asking you to go against the grain of your own inner integrity just to conform to their standards. The thief comes in many different forms, and it promises you greatness. All you have to do is sacrifice some part of your soul to it, your integrity, your character, your belief. Now, the thief promises life to you and the world, but steals it from you instead, and we often don't notice it because we blame it on those people. The thief is anyone who promises the same spiritual blessings that Christ is promising, but without giving of themselves for the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The thief comes in by some other door, not the one of self-sacrifice, but promises to use then violence on our behalf. This is not how it works. That's the thief. Spiritual writer Evelyn Underhill said this: "The only true guide is the shepherd who has gone before and who knows the pitfalls and the way." And the way that our shepherd has gone is through death, via humility and self-sacrifice. And he sanctified that way for us, and we follow it in the same manner. And anything that does not look or act like the Christ of the Gospels is a thief come to steal, kill, and destroy with false promises. The pitfalls Evelyn here speaks of are common, everyday greed, pride, envy, violence, lust for more, and all the other things that seem to make a lot of money and grant us a lot of power. Now, there's this figure in the Old Testament called Molech. It was one of the idols that the Israelites worshipped. And Molech is actually an embodiment of everything we're talking about. In Jeremiah 32, it talks about how the people of God are so enamored with the allure of power that they sacrifice their children in exchange for this promised power. Now we're thinking like, oh my God, they're crazy. But these weren't bloodthirsty pagans. These were the people of God who believed that this was what was required to make the world right. And God actually says, don't you think I can do this? Is anything too hard for me? No, but no, you got to go and trust in evil and corrupt leaders and their demands, and it costs you your kids' future. This is actually called the Molech principle today. The nuclear arms race was like the same thing. It's a rush to get the destructive power before someone else gets it and wield it upon the world, right? And now we have nuclear arms all over the place. We can destroy the entire planet with the push of a button. And climate change is the same thing. It's the refusal to cut greenhouse gases as a company because the other company might outperform you by not cutting them, so you can't cut because they're not going to cut. And this is just one big race to the edge of a cliff. God promises that we don't need to put our trust in violence or someone who promises to wield violence on our behalf in order to make the world right. God already died to make the world right, and no one else needs to. This is the hardest part of faith, I think, is trust that doing things God's way can actually bring about God's ends. That's the most difficult part of the faith, is to believe that that works. But as Desmond Tutu said, when we surrender, we release our grip on our own lives and allow something greater to take over. And this is the hope our faith gives us. Not that if we do everything right, tragedy is going to skip over us and then riches are going to fall down upon us. Instead, the promise is if we can pray and act, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, we might find pasture. Christ is the gate. We have to go through him. And he actually showed us how, by modeling this way of being. I was out gardening this week in my backyard. By accident, actually. I just found myself there. And I was like, oh, look, gardening needs to happen. And we had some dead growth from last year that had to be pulled out so the new growth can take over. And as I said, this was totally unplanned. I just found myself in that part of the yard, so I decided to do it. So I just started to grab hold of this dead stuff and yank it out with my bare hands. And I was like, all right, this looks good. And then afterwards, I'm like, why do my hands feel funny? And I looked, and on the palm of my hands, there's all these little prickers. Man, I should have worn gloves. I didn't think about it. Now, thankfully, they just were like few and came right out. But it made me think, like, flowers can be beautiful and painful depending on how we hold them. Now, if I clench down upon a rose stem, I will experience a lot of pain, maybe even some blood. But if I rest a rose stem in my hand, I will experience beauty. Now, it's really hard not to grip down upon the beauty of life. I always say something like, the pictures just don't do this sunset any justice. Yet I still took the picture. Like, something within me said, capture this moment, hold on to it. Now, there's nothing wrong with photography. I love to see well done photos. It is an art form. Keep taking photos. I'm talking about a posture of life when we need to look out. We need to look out for this posture of life where we don't experience the life within this moment because we're too caught up in trying to capture the joy of it. Or we're too caught up in trying to rush past the hurt of this moment. And we clench down on life to pause and preserve the good or prevent or cliche away the pain. In either case, we miss the life that is present right here because we live in the past through regret or nostalgia, or we live in the future through anxiety or anticipation. And either way, we clench down upon the rose stem of this moment here and experience pain instead of life. Now, this isn't a big moral failure on our part. It's more of like an unlearned skill that just causes us a lot of extra suffering. Now, there's a theory out there called just world theory that believes the world is essentially a fair and just place to those who do it right. It says if you work hard, you don't experience poverty. If you behave yourself, you don't experience tragedy. If you affiliate properly, you won't experience loneliness. But then there's opposite side of this coin that says if you are experiencing anything bad, like chronic illness or abuse or poverty or mental illness or loneliness, well, it must be because you did it wrong or you didn't do enough, because this world is a fair and just place. There's just rules that you got to follow and stuff that you got to do. And as long as you do those things, everything's good. It must be because you're lazy that you brought this poverty upon yourself, or you just need to find that silver bullet for your health and then you'll be feeling great. Or you must have done something that made God upset and now you're experiencing tragedy. And when we say it like that, we totally know that this is not how it works. But the temptation that allures us back is that of control. If we can just find the right combination of living and thinking, then we can avoid tragedy and invite blessing, because the world, it's essentially a just and fair place to those who do it properly, right? But it's not. Perhaps it's easier to believe that we can control our lives' outcomes than to admit that this world doesn't care, really, and deals out cards in what feels like a random pattern. Now, the Psalms actually recognize this, and so many Psalms are actually geared towards this lament with God. And when we think like it's our conduct or belief that triggers blessing or curse, then we betray this internal just world theory inside of us. But in reality, life happens. And with it comes the good and bad, the beautiful and ugly, the pleasant and the difficult. And life flows like water into us as a gift. And the best way to receive water is the cup your hands in a receptive manner and let it come. But when we fear loss of life, loss of beauty, we can clamp down upon the flow of water in attempts to hold on to it, and we miss the life that is still flowing. And we become protective of the few drops we have left in our hands, and we squeeze them into fists to attack and defend. All in attempts to protect the very thing that we could gain if we just opened back up to experience life anew. Abundant life, like Christ talks about here, is more life that can fit into your hands, and the only way to experience it is with open hands, letting life flow into and through. And Thomas Merton, my homeboy, he said, we must be willing to let go of the life we have planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us. So may we learn the art of receptive living through open hands.
Thank you for listening to the Liminal Living Podcast. If you're interested in spiritual direction to help you navigate through your dark night or deconstruction journey, please check out our website, www.liminalliving.org. We will see you next week. Blessings.